Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever feel like you are always a little bit stressed, no matter what is going on? Or maybe you notice your anxiety levels shoot up during tough times, then calm down later. Well, psychologists have been trying to figure out the difference between this steady, long-term anxiety and the temporary kind for ages. Today we're diving into a fascinating study that uses a cool new model to look closely at the state trait anxiety inventory, or STAI, which is a super common tool used to measure these two types of anxiety. This paper is all about picking apart the STAI to see what is really going on with its trait and state scores. The STAI has two parts, the STAI-T for trait anxiety, which is supposed to measure your general tendency to feel anxious, and the STAI-S for state anxiety, which is meant to capture how anxious you feel right now. But how well do these scores actually separate those stable long-term feelings from the fleeting ones? That is the big question this research tackles. The researchers used a dataset from over 1,000 people who answered surveys many times over several months during the COVID-19 pandemic. This long-term data is crucial because it lets us see how anxiety changes or stays the same over time. So, what did they want to find out? Well, first they wanted to understand the basic structure of the STAI questions themselves. Do they really measure just one thing, or are there different aspects they capture? They also wanted to know if the structure stayed the same over time. Then, the really interesting part, they used a special statistical technique called the Trait State Occasion or TSO model to break down the scores. Think of it like this. A TSO model tries to figure out how much of someone's anxiety score is due to their core personality, the trait, how much is due to the specific moment they took the test, the occasion, and how much is a mix of both. They were especially keen to see how stable the trait-like part of the anxiety score was, particularly for the STAI-S, which is supposed to measure temporary anxiety. To do this, they started by running some statistical tests on the individual questions of the STAI. They compared different ways these questions might be grouped together to represent anxiety. They found that a model that accounted for a general anxiety factor and also considered how the wording of the questions might influence the answers, like whether a question was phrased positively or negatively, fit the data best. This is important because it means that while there is a core concept of anxiety, the way questions are worded can also play a role. Then they confirmed that this structure held up consistently as people took the survey over several waves, which is called longitudinal measurement in Variance. This makes sure the tool is measuring the same thing reliably over time. After figuring out the best way to understand the underlying structure of the survey questions, they moved on to the TSO modeling. This is where they really decomposed the variance. They grouped related questions into parcels to make the analysis more manageable. Then they applied the TSO model. Essentially, this model looks at each person's scores across multiple time points and tries to disentangle the stable part of their anxiety from the part that shifts from one measurement to the next. This allows them to quantify for the very first time how much of the score is truly trait-like and how much is state-like or occasion. Specific. Now, for the big results, for the STAI-T, the part designed to measure trait anxiety, they found that a whopping 92.5% of the variance was trait. This means that for this scale, most of the differences they see between people in their scores are actually reflecting stable, enduring differences in how prone they are to anxiety. This strongly supports the idea that the STAI-T is indeed measuring a stable personality characteristic. But here is where it gets really interesting, especially for the STAIs, the state anxiety scale. Even with the STAIs, they found that a significant majority of the variance, about 70.4%, was trait. This is a much higher percentage than you might expect if you think of the STAIs as purely measuring fleeting, right now, feelings. It suggests that a large part of the differences in STAI-EZ scores between people is also due to stable individual differences in their anxiety proneness, rather than just transient situational reactions. They also looked at how the split between trait and occasion variance changed over different time spans. For the STAIs, they found that when people were surveyed over longer periods, the occasion-specific variance, meaning the part that changes from moment to moment, tended to increase slightly. However, over shorter time frames, the proportion of traits, like variance, remained quite consistent. This hints that perhaps longer follow-up periods give more opportunity for temporary states to influence the overall score. And importantly, they checked if using different sets of measurements for the same time span made a big difference. They found that it didn't. This tells us that the way the measurements are spaced within a given time frame isn't the main driver of the trait, like proportion, but rather the overall length of the time span itself matters more. So, what does all of this mean for us? The study's main takeaway is that the STAI-T and STAI-S might not be as categorically different as we've assumed. While the STAI-T is very strongly rooted in trait, like variance, the STAI-S also contains a substantial amount of it. This suggests that the distinction between state and trait anxiety captured by these scales is more of a quantitative difference rather than a clean categorical split. It implies that even the state scale is heavily influenced by stable, long-term anxiety tendencies. This has significant implications for how we interpret scores. Especially from the STAI-S, the researchers caution that STAI-S scores shouldn't be seen as pure indicators of temporary anxiety. A high score on the STAI-S might reflect both immediate anxiety and a person's underlying, enduring tendency to be anxious. This is crucial for researchers and clinicians. If you are using the STAI-S to measure the immediate impact of an intervention, for example, you need to be aware that a good chunk of the score might be reflecting something more stable. The study's strengths are clear. It used a robust TSO model to directly disentangle variance components, and it systematically examined how this played out across different time frames. However, there are some limitations to keep in mind. The data was collected during the COVID-19 pandemic, a period of unprecedented global stress. This unique context could have influenced anxiety levels and how they varied over time. So, the findings might be partly shaped by this specific historical period. Also, disentangling the exact effect of time span length from the specific phases of the pandemic was challenging. The researchers note that their findings shouldn't be taken as direct proof that longer intervals cause changes in variance composition, but rather that they allow for more opportunity for such changes. So, what is my take on all this? This study is a really important step forward in understanding how we measure anxiety. The TSO model is a powerful tool that moves us beyond simply labeling scores as state or trait, and instead quantifies the underlying components, the finding that the STAI-S has such a substantial trait. Like component is a crucial reminder for anyone using these measures to be very careful with interpretation. It emphasizes that anxiety is complex, and that stable individual differences often underpin even what we think of as temporary feelings. Future research could indeed replicate these findings in non-pandemic times or even in experimental settings, to see if these proportions hold true across different contexts. Understanding these nuances is key to accurately assessing and helping people manage their anxiety. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment with your thoughts on the STAI or anxiety measurement, and don't forget to subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science explained simply. We'll see you in the next episode.